Good morning. My name is Paul Reeder, and this is week 6 of our Great Valley Presbyterian Christian education class through the book of Exodus. Actually, just the first 15 chapters. This week we're going to cover chapters 11 all the way, let's make sure I get it right here, through, I guess it's 13 verse 16. So we're going to cover about 3 chapters. This may be... We're going to try to move pretty fast, but it may be a little bit long. I do encourage you, if you can, take a minute and read from chapter 11 all the way through chapter 13, verse 16. And once you've had a chance to read that, kind of think about what things stuck out to you, maybe what things were repeated. There's a big emphasis on repetition. And maybe just write down a couple thoughts you have about the passage. And then jump back on, and we'll go on from there. Thanks. See you in just a minute. All right, before we jump into the actual text, I want to read you a section from Exodus 4, verses 21 through 23. And the Lord said to Moses, this is from much earlier, this is before, this is right when Moses is kind of being brought up as the guy who's going to lead them out. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I have put in your power. But I will harden his heart, so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, and get this, this is where this is the emphasis. Israel is my firstborn son, and I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. So way back in Exodus 4, the seeds are being planted for the idea that God isn't just here to take this random people and to free them, as it were, to liberate them. There's more going on here than just liberation of a random people. God sees the children of Israel, the children of Abraham, with whom he's made covenant promises, as his son. It is a son-level relationship. Keep that in mind as you think about Jesus in the New Testament, because there's a lot in the New Testament that feeds and builds off of that. But in terms of where we are right now, I want us to see God's threat from the beginning is how you treat my son will determine how I deal with you. And there's a retributive and equitable justice, essentially, that's coming to the surface here that he's giving us kind of a preview of, and we're going to find that come to roost. We're going to see that kind of exploded and brought full force in the second. So I'm going to start reading in Exodus 11, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, yet one plague more I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterward, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will drive you away completely. So the Lord is telling Moses, okay, all of these plagues leading up to that I told you are going to happen, and I also told you Pharaoh's heart will be hardened. I'll harden his heart. Pharaoh will harden his heart. His response to these first plagues is going to be to harden his heart. And now I'm bringing a plague to which his hardness will finally buckle. And not only will he let you go, he essentially will drive you out. He will force you to leave. There will be, his stubbornness will be completely broken. Verse 2, speak now in the hearing of the people, that they ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor for silver and gold jewelry. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. The idea here is that when the people of Israel leave, remember, they are enslaved, they have no power whatsoever, they haven't even really fought for their own freedom at all. There's been a little bit of resistance as far as, no, we're not killing our own children. But short of that, there's been almost no resistance. They've cried out, but they're powerless. And now they are going to leave Egypt as the dominant power. Very often in ancient societies, when one culture or one king defeated another king, he carried off the spoils of war, right? The victory, they'd take gold, they'd take all the valuables, and the winning team takes the spoils. And here the idea is this enslaved people who has zero power, by God's power, becomes the dominant force, and they walk off with the spoils. Verse 3, and the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt. in the sight of Pharaoh's servants and in the sight of the people. So here you see another great reversal. Not only is this enslaved people being elevated so they walk out victorious, but Moses, God's servant, who is a self-proclaimed nobody, has become great in everyone's eyes. He is well respected. He is a great man. Verse 4. So Moses said, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been, nor ever will be again. So God is saying, it's time. The resistance has reached a culminating point. Now I bring, as it were, the final incapacitation blow, whatever. The blow that's going to take Egypt down is coming now. And what's that going to look like? It's look like the firstborn of every person. So from the highest end of Egypt, the person who's on the throne, Pharaoh's next in line, the next king will be taken out, down to the firstborn of the slave girl, basically from the top all the way down to the bottom, and as well as the cattle. So that's the idea that all life is the Lord's, and he is taking all the firstborn lives in Egypt. Notice what it says about a cry. That word cry is the same word that's used when Israel is enslaved. And essentially, once again, this theme of reversal. Egypt has gone from causing that cry, and now, because they refuse to obey, God will allow them to have that same cry. But not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Israel will be elevated. Dogs in that culture were not thought of in any high, popular, or good way. They were kind of trash. Like people didn't think man's best friend when they saw a dog. They saw a scavenger, something that scavenged dead animals, something that cleaned up waste. And so basically it's not even the lowest thing on the totem pole is going to respond when Israel walks out. They're going to walk out and everybody's going to send them on their way. All these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, Get out, you and all the people who follow you. And after that, I will go out. So this is Moses saying the reversal is going to be complete, whereas before everyone stood in defiance of me as I brought God's word. Now they're all going to bow down. They're all going to send us out. And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. So you have this idea that Moses is beyond frustrated at this point. Moses has sought to bring God's Pharaoh. He's brought ever increasing signs of God's power. Creation is beginning to unravel. Egypt as a nation is coming apart, and now it's almost like Moses is angry that Pharaoh is still resisting, and it's very interesting. Moses is not unaffected, emotionless. He has no Buddhist calm as this goes down. Moses is frustrated that Pharaoh has not yet capitulated, and it's coming to this. Verse 9, Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. So Pharaoh is forewarned. If you don't let God's son go, God will take your son. There's a retributive justice idea going here. And notice the final comment, Pharaoh still will not listen to you, so that my power may be seen. Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of his land. So this is kind of a summary statement of everything leading up to here. God has done wonders, and yet Pharaoh is refusing to capitulate. He is holding on to his power. He is standing up to God. He will not be moved. And that's how he reached this point. So that's the first section we're going to cover. We're going to pause there, and then we'll jump back in with the next section. This third section kind of begins in, it begins in a different way, and it takes a widely different direction. So let's look at this. Chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for each household. So notice how this chapter starts. You go from this high-intensity narrative where Moses walks out angry. He's confronted Pharaoh kind of for the last time. He said, this is the big one. This is when everything's going to change. And then suddenly you jump into chapter 12 and God says, oh, by the way, pause. Almost like a little time out. This month is going to be for you the beginning of months. And the idea is from this moment on, all of creation is kind of, to some extent, being reoriented. How you think about life, how you pattern your life, how you orient your daily, day-to-day walk, your year, what's most important to you is being rearranged. From now on, it's as though year zero is starting. We're starting the calendar from this moment, from right now. And what the idea is, there is a break going down in history right now. Something so significant is taking place that part of what God is saying is, I want this to shape the course of history. We're starting time all over again right here. This is new creation, a new beginning. And notice how that starts. Everyone take a lamb for each household. Verse 4, and if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make a count of the lambs. This is a feast. They're going to eat this. This is a single lamb, one all eaten. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. So this sounds like we're just getting into somewhat of a normal idea of a sacrifice. A lamb is going to be taken. It's going to be eaten. There's going to be a kind of a festival around it. And, okay, great. We're going to kill the lambs at twilight. It's an interesting break, right? He's just told he's going to take the firstborn of Egypt, and now we're talking about sacrifices and New Year's. What's going on? Verse 7, then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat. Now that's a little bit weird, right? Take the blood of this lamb that you're going to kill, paint the sides of the door and the space over the door. No explanation. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire. With unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they shall eat it. So this feast is prescribed. This feast of unleavened bread as well as lamb, bitter herbs. Don't eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roast it, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in hand. So it's kind of an unusual feast. It's almost like he's saying, okay, this is fast food. Get ready to eat it. Only have enough where you can all eat it, and then it's gone. And not only that, plan to leave. As soon as you start eating it, have your gear on. Get your backpack on. As soon as we finish this meal, we are heading out. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. It says a declaration of this is a big deal. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. So God is giving the people of Israel a couple day heads up, saying, hey, we're starting the calendar here. I want you to know that in 10 days this is going to happen, and in 14 days this is going to happen, and we're going to have this feast. And when that feast happens, you be ready to roll. Why? Because I myself am going to show up. I'm going to pass through the land of Egypt on that night, the night of the feast, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And notice this unusual line, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. So the idea here is God is not just taking on Pharaoh, he's not just taking on the people of Egypt, but he's actually, this is a sign of judgment against those in whom Pharaoh trusts, all their gods. And it's interesting, in each of the plagues, a lot of commentators come and say, hey, we see reflections here of this god or that god, whether they're worshiping the Nile, whether they're worshiping frogs and fertility, whether they're worshiping Ra, the sun god, and then God brings darkness. All of these things can be seen kind of against the backdrop of Egypt's gods in whom they trust, from Pharaoh, who is the son of the sun god, all the way down their pantheon. And the idea is God is bringing judgment. God is saying, I am setting things right. I will show who the real gods are, and in doing so, I will bring judgment against them. They will not be able to defend off my judgment. I am the Lord. Verse 13, we get a little bit of an explanation. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. So notice this point. This blood is a sign for you. It is supposed to point somewhere else. The idea is blood, when blood is spilled, and in this case, it's pointing to the fact that this lamb has died. And the idea of the blood being over the doorposts and on the sides of the door is to some extent symbolizing, hey, in this house, death has already passed. There's some sort of substitution saying, in this way, this lamb has died, so the firstborn is already taken care of. So it's a sign for you, Israelites. And then also in verse 13, and when I see the blood, so it's also a sign for God. It's like God himself is walking in between the houses. Okay, that one's got blood on it, we can pass by. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So it's it's told in such an interesting way, because it's as though God is saying, I'm coming for everybody. And this is what we find out later, is God is coming for all the firstborn. All the firstborn are his, Egyptian and Israelite. He's going to tell us that in a couple minutes. And the only way that you get to, as it were, redeem your firstborn children is if a lamb, sheep or goat, small mammal, male in great condition is sacrificed, and that blood essentially is put on your door, and that becomes a substitute. Super interesting topic to discuss. Thinking about the New Testament, thinking about the book of John. How does John, especially more than the other Gospels, cast Jesus? He is the Lamb who has come to take away the sins, not just of Israel, but of the whole world. He will give himself, and John, especially in getting close to Jesus' death on the cross and the Last Supper, John's idea is especially to show Jesus as that Passover lamb. He is both God's son, his only son, as well as this Passover lamb. So hold on to that. We can discuss that Sunday. Verse 14, this day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. As a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast. So this day, what's about to happen now, isn't just a one-time event that, yeah, it happened, man, that was a cool time back then. But no, this is something you're to celebrate. You're to reenact this constantly throughout your lifetime. Every year, do this forever as a feast. Make this a time of celebration. Celebrate this. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove the leaven out of your houses, for if anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. So notice that feast is getting expanded on, right? We're not just talking about a meal with a lamb, but this leaven, leaven is something which causes bread to rise. And the idea is you're not to have any of that. Your bread is going to be flat. There's going to be no rising of the bread. We're going to discuss the logic of that in a couple minutes, but hold on to that for now. On the first day, verse 16, you shall hold an assembly, and on the seventh day, a holy assembly. So that whole week is to be essentially bookended by these solemn days of worship on which you're not going to work. So it's basically a week of holidays bookended by holidays and celebrations. No work shall be done on those days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your house. If anyone eats what is leavened, that person will be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Whether he is a sojourner or a native of the land, you shall eat nothing leavened. In all your places you shall eat unleavened bread. So if you haven't got the point yet, part of the point is get leaven out of your houses. Don't eat leavened bread, because we need to memorialize something and reenact that past event again and again on a yearly basis, because I don't want you to ever forget how significant this is, right? So notice the repetition. Verse 21. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that's in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that's in the basin. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you. You shall observe this rite as a statute for you and for your sons forever. When you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this service." So the idea is nothing essentially new is presented here. It's a repetition saying, this is something, go get ready to do this exact thing. And then once you've done it once, remember it, because once you get to this promised land, once you get to the place where God is taking you, you're going to do it again and again as a memorial forever. I want you to notice how almost to the point of absurdity the repetition is. The idea is that this is to be something that you are to memorialize forever, not just with a couple days, not just with a holiday, but with a feast, with a memorable feast. And it's such an important, critical feast that if someone tries to partake of the feast and they're not part of the covenant community, kick them out forever. If they try to take leaven and they're part of the covenant community, kick them out forever. The idea is this is a big deal. Either participate or get out. And when your children say to you, "What do you mean by this service?" Verse 26, you shall say, "It's the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. For he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians, but spared our houses." And the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Then the people of Israel went and did so as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. So this kind of ends that section. It ends on a note of, this is so that this idea can be passed down multi-generational. Not just ending in one generation, remember it, but for hundreds and hundreds of years after, this is to be memorialized. So that's the second section. We're gonna take a break for a second, and then we'll come back and do some more. Section 3 begins in chapter 12, verse 29. And this is kind of, so far it's been preparation. I'm trying to tell you how important this moment is going to be, prepare to memorialize it, and it's all preparation for what's about to happen. And then in verse 29, it happens. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who is in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. So Yahweh shows up in person, and when he shows up in person, as he said, all the firstborn of the Egyptians, from the highest, from Pharaoh's firstborn son, down to the firstborn of this captive that's in the dungeon, all the firstborn of the livestock. Basically, it's universal throughout the land of Egypt. Yahweh claims the firstborn's lives. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there is not a house where someone was not dead. So as predicted, the Egyptians and Pharaoh in specific are woken up by death, and as they are woken up by death, this cry goes out just like the Israelites cried out. Now it's Egypt who's refused to give way to Yahweh. Now they are crying out. Then he, that's Pharaoh, summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said." So for the first time, wholeheartedly, Pharaoh is saying, don't just go take a 3-day journey, get out forever. I'm kicking you out. And not only that, go serve the Lord. Go worship your God. Clearly, this God has outmatched me. You go serve him. Get out. Verse 32, take your flocks and your herds, so this is without constraint, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. So that idea of blessing, it almost always communicates the idea of the superior person blesses the inferior person. And basically, it's a way of saying, one, your leaving will be a blessing to us, and two, I need you as the superior to bless me, the inferior. Verse 33, the Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste. So the Egyptians are in a hurry, get out now. For they said, we shall all be dead. So the Egyptians are reading the writing on the wall, and they know if we don't get rid of them now, we are all going to die. God's taken our firstborn. We're all that's left. Complete destruction is upon us. Get out now, or we're all toast. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls being bound up in their cloaks on their shoulders, and the people of Israel had done as Moses had told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So the idea is the people have bread that is not leavened. There's no point in leavening the bread. A couple days ago, my wife is making homemade pizza dough. You put leaven in it. The leaven causes the bread to rise and it forms bubbles. It causes the bread to be light. Certain small person in my household happens to be playing with the lump of leavened dough, which is supposed to be left still so that it can rise, and instead he shoves his hand in it and all the air goes out of it. And so we now have flatbread pizza. And the idea is similar here. There's no point in putting leaven in the bread to cause the air bubbles to rise, because all that movement of you leaving, of being on the move, will cause the air to go out anyway. So the idea is get rid of the leaven. There's no point in leavening it. Leave it behind. Go, because we are on the move. Leave behind everything that's behind you and go. Verse 37, and the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. So, huge crowd. Some commentators say close to 2 million people. Other commentators say, hey, that word 1,000 can be translated tribes. So basically 600 tribes of people. Different commentators give different numbers. We're not really sure, but the idea is a large number of people exit Egypt at this point. A mixed multitude also went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. This isn't just the children of Abraham who are leaving. It's the children of Abraham and a lot of other folks that probably are non-Egyptian, but they're living in Egypt, possibly slave, possibly non-slave, that they leave. So Israel leaves along with everything and a lot of extra people. And they baked unleavened cakes of dough that they'd brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt, and they could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of watching by the Lord to bring them up out of the land of Egypt. So this same night is a night of watching kept by the Lord, kept to the Lord by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. So the sum is, this thing they've been waiting for is finally happening. They are up. They are on the move. The exodus from Egypt is happening now. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, this is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat of it. So isn't it funny? Like, it switches between narrative and then commentary on that narrative that's always future looking. Okay, this thing that's just happened, hold on to it. It's super important. And when you celebrate this feast, let me tell you what's got to happen. So notice it says, no foreigner shall eat of it. So anyone who is not part of your community shall not eat it. But every slave that is bought for money may eat of it after you have circumcised him. No foreigner or hired worker may eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside, and you shall not break any of its bone. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. If a stranger shall sojourn with you and would keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised. Then he may come near and keep it. He shall be as a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. There shall be one law for the native and for the stranger who sojourns among you. So the idea here is God is forming a covenant community, and the symbol of that covenant community is circumcision. And anyone who is circumcised, no matter your ethnicity, is invited. Hey, if you want to come and take this, sure, come on and just be circumcised. The idea here is that a lot of that mixed multitude that are not children of Abraham are being included. It's a really interesting idea, because we kind of have this idea that Old Testament Israel was almost anti-other nations, when actually it's kind of the opposite. Anybody is welcome to come in, but you must keep the symbol of covenant community. You must enter into God's covenant community regardless of your ethnicity, and you're in. However, even if you are part of the, as it were, the ethnic Israel, and you are refusing circumcision, you're out, which makes us go back to Moses and think, well, why did God try to kill Moses earlier? Because he had not circumcised his son. So once again, this emphasis on who's in and who's out is there. And it's kind of a big deal. It is critical that we understand, what does it mean to be part of God's covenant community? Because there are distinct lines drawn here for us. Verse 50, all the people of Israel did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron. On that very day, the Lord brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. So everybody's participating, and now they are out. I'm going to pause there for another section break, and we'll come back in just a second. The next section, beginning in chapter 13, begins in an interesting way. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both man and of beast, is mine. Isn't that intriguing? So in the same way that God essentially claimed the firstborn of Egypt, he does the exact same thing for Israel. All the firstborn are mine. He's going to expand on that in a second, but it's an interesting way. It's another interesting break in the narrative, right? Then Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery. For by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. So you remember things here by doing things. Remember, it isn't something you just, I need to think about that. But remembering something means taking action. Remember it by not eating leavened bread for a week. Remember it by celebrating this Passover. Remember it by only certain people being allowed to celebrate the Passover. Remember these things by taking action. Verse 4, today in the month of Abib, you are going out. Remember by starting your calendar on this date. And when the Lord brings you into land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this service in this month. So remember by celebrating this feast. 7 days you shall eat the unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, and no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory. You shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. So the idea here is you are to celebrate these things. You are to remember them by taking action, and the action you are to take is essentially by relive these things, live them out, almost as though you're to dramatize that exit again by eating unleavened bread, by celebrating this Passover. You are to constantly, almost it's like a play. We're to go through the motions again so that we remember, so that people are thinking, why are we doing this again? And you're to be able to give an answer to your son. Well, it's because God did this for us. You shall tell your son on that day, it's because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. So this is a pretty critical statement, right? It's supposed to be always in front of you so that you can't look at your hands without thinking it, so that it's like something that's right in front of your eyes. You can't see past it. And the idea here is never get past what God has done for you so that you may be careful to obey God's law. Like, remember who he did, who he is, and what he did for you, so that you may follow him, so that you can say, God told me to do this, and I want to obey. For with a strong hand the Lord brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your fathers, and shall give it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. So coming back to the idea of the firstborn, this isn't just something that's a once and done thing, and it's also not just something, the firstborn thing is thought about when we have our festival of Passover, but every single firstborn that was brought into the world within the Israelite covenant community was to be given to the Lord's, to be set apart for him. All the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be the Lord's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with the land, or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. So donkeys are worth a lot more than lambs. And the idea here is either kill the donkey that's the firstborn, or in its substitute place, sacrifice a lamb. Every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. So Israel is God's firstborn son. All firstborn sons born in Israel are to be redeemed to God. All these things are pointing toward the idea of God's unique special relationship with his people and God's claim over his people. And when in time your son asks you, what does this mean? You shall say to him, by a strong hand the Lord brought us up out of Egypt from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all the males that first open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I shall redeem. It shall be as a mark on your hand or frontlets between your eyes, for by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. So the idea of the firstborn being the Lord's is explicitly said here. This is to remind you that God essentially redeemed us by taking the firstborn from all of Egypt. And in claiming the firstborn in all the land of Israel, there's this correlation that a price was paid, redemption had to be made to free us from slavery. We are now the Lord's. You can't help but think of the passage in the New Testament. You were bought with a price. You are not your own. That's not a New Testament concept. That's an Old Testament concept that we get to live with now. So that ends the section of Scripture that we're gonna cover. We're gonna pause for a second and then come back with a couple closing thoughts and questions. All right, to finish it off with, have a couple questions and thoughts for you. First off, this section is all about not only memorializing God's great acts so that they inform our identities now, but it's really about this relationship between God and his people. One of the things that must be understood that's worth thinking about is what has established our identities now. Like, what things do we repeat and do we celebrate? Because those things are critical. Part of what it's pushing us towards is that we need to be intentional about the things we celebrate and what we memorialize. And why do we need to be intentional? Because the underlying idea here is it is easy to forget who we are, whose we are, what God has done for. It is easy for our identity to become informed and draped more heavily by other things than by what God has done, who God is, and who he has made us. So one of the big questions here is how are you being intentional about establishing God's idea of who you are? Like, what things are you doing to celebrate that? And especially as we raise children, what things are we doing so that they come away knowing this is who God is, this is what he's done to save me, to redeem me, and that therefore this is who I am. And it also raises a big question of who are you? And we have to ask, if someone is talking to you and they don't know you and they were to watch your life, what would they come with saying, this is who this person is? What is their identity? How do we see ourselves, not only as individuals, but as part of a covenant community? Second, really interesting thing, I love this theme, is the idea that a mixed multitude left with the Israelites, and then God goes abundantly overboard to demonstrate that anybody who wants to be part of this Passover meal, they are welcome to come, but they better be circumcised. The emphasis is not on ethnicity, are you a descendant of Abraham, but rather, are you part of God's community? If you're a foreigner and you want to be part of this, if you're a slave and you want to be part of this, fine. You're welcome to come and be part of God's covenant community, but you must keep that covenant sign of faith, which is circumcision. And I love the theme that God is even now bringing in, as it were, the nations. Third thing to think about that I think is kind of critical here, and that's that in this passage, judgment is something that is not theoretical or distant in the future, but it is critical for us to think about the fact that when God threatens judgment, it's not theoretical, but especially in this case, it is real. He has been threatening Pharaoh from chapter 4 onward. Let my people go, or I will bring judgment, even to the point of taking your firstborn son. And it is easy for us to sometimes think that God's threatening of judgment is distant or not real, whereas in this case, it comes home. In all its horrific nature, God brings judgment as the perfectly just God that he is, God full of mercy. That does not mean that God will not, cannot, or does not bring equitable, right, and just judgment. Just because it doesn't match my idea of what justice is, or just because I have questions about whether or not it seems just to me, to some extent, part of this passage is saying, God is God, and I'm not God, and you are not God, and we've got to hold that close. If we lose that idea and we begin acting in some way like we are divine or we should have a say over who he is, it really creates trouble in our relationship, as we see with Pharaoh. And even Moses saying, Lord, I don't want to do this. And God finally, that's the only point we see God get angry is with Moses saying, no, you need to remember, you're not God, I am God. So thing to wrestle with, are you good with God saying, I will bring judgment on my terms in a just and equitable way? Fourth thing to think about is this idea of kind of this twin parallel idea of sonship. Israel is God's son. It's his beloved son. He is willing to go all out of love for his son to rescue and redeem his son, that his son may serve him. And you see that theme come out so strongly in the Gospels and even in the epistles when they're talking about Jesus being God's one and only son. To some extent, Israel as a whole finds itself most complete and most perfectly in God's own son. And also, the other parallel kind of to that is this this idea of the Passover Lamb, right? Which is given to redeem that which is lost, that which is enslaved, that which is broken. Excuse me. And in both of those, there's this idea of substitute, right? There's this sonship thing where God is saying, I will redeem my son. And Pharaoh, if you don't let my son go, I'm taking your son. And then also, this idea of substitution in this lamb's blood, the death of the lamb brings about the life of the firstborn son. There's lots of questions, lots of points of discussion there, but in your life, where do you see that coming home? What does it mean to you if it says Jesus is the firstborn among many brothers? Meaning there are other children of God, other followers of God, but Jesus is the firstborn son. Once again, huge theme in John. And also this idea of substitution, where God is essentially saying, I will redeem my people. I will pass over them for judgment, but that judgment will come at a price. A death life must be taken for death to pass. Anyway, a whole lot there for discussion. Looking forward to discussing it with you on Sunday. If you have comments or questions, feel free to reach out to me. In the meantime, really looking forward to it. Isn't Scripture amazing? It's amazing. Looking forward to see you guys Sunday. Thanks. Bye.